I think New York City is ready for a Muslim mayor? Absolutely not. And in this episode, I'm gonna explain to you why. And this goes back to Christopher Columbus. Because did you know that the nickname of Christopher Columbus was the Muslim Slayer, Matamoros? And I'm not quoting anyone, I'm quoting Alan McHale, who is a professor at Yale University. And he also said that the life of Christopher Columbus has been branded by being victimized by Muslims. And this is because he was born right around the time that the Roman Empire was being defeated by the Ottoman Empire. And it gets worse. I'm also going to explain that Christopher Columbus's voyages to the Americas were part of a holy war against Muslims. CEW research has found that 76% of Americans feel like nothing has impacted them more in their life than 9/11. Not the invention of the internet, no president in their history, but again, being victimized by Muslims is their core identity. So no, I do not think that New York City is ready for a Muslim mayor. I do think he might win, but I also fear for when that will happen. And I think there's a scenario that we need to consider, which is the glass cliff scenario. The glass cliff scenario is when a person who naturally gets blamed in a society for problems is put in a place of leadership right before the system collapses. And I don't know if you noticed, but JP Morgan said in 2025 in April that the chances on a recession, a financial crisis, were 60%. In May, they said it was 40%, but this just shows how unstable the economy is right now. And the glass cliff phenomenon, it tells us that when this financial crisis would take place, that having a Muslim responsible for all the chaos that will ensure So the US has a problem with Muslim hate, and that was something that became super clear once again once Mamdani won the primary elections. And let's take a look at some of the responses of politicians, but also TV personalities, and how misinformed, but also highly Islamophobic they were. So let's start with the most intellectual challenging comment I've seen in a while. That was by Marjorie Taylor Greene, and she's an American far-right politician. I had never heard of her, but look at what she posted. She posted a picture of the Statue of Liberty, and basically she wanted to mock the Statue of Liberty. So she generated an AI image with the Statue of Liberty with a black cloth on top of it. And I've never seen a woman like that. Like, I live in the Middle East. I've never seen a woman like that. But her idea, I guess, was to make the Statue of Liberty look Muslim. I legit had to Google her level of education when I saw this, because Marjorie, you clearly do not know the history of America, because the Statue of Liberty is already a depiction of a Muslim woman from Egypt. Like, do you even read books? So the Statue of Liberty is a depiction of a Muslim peasant woman from Egypt, and it was designed by sculptor Frederick Auguste Bartholdi. And it was, however, rejected by the Egyptian government, because initially the idea was that it would be placed there near the Suez Canal. But the Egyptian government was like, no, this is not worth the money. So Frederick, he pitched it to France, and he proposed that they would give it as a gift to the United States as a symbol for the end of slavery and the Civil War. This is also described in New York Magazine, by the way, if you want to read about it. And I thought Marjorie looked really dumb when she posted this. Like, the fact that she didn't know her own history. And I'm going to show you also, let me show you the initial design of what it was supposed to look like. And I think here you can see that this looks pretty much like the current design as well. And I thought it was funny, the caption of Marjorie's post, it said like, "This hits hard." And I was like, what is hitting hard? What's hitting hard is the fact that you didn't know your own history. Like the image I just showed you of the design, that comes from Aramco World Magazine, by the way, which is a Saudi company. And so I think what hits really hard is that Marjorie is being corrected in her own social media post by a Muslim hijabi with the use of a image provided to us by Saudi Aramco World Magazine. I'm sorry, but that's hilarious to me. Let's go back to business. Is NYC ready for a Muslim mayor? And to evaluate this, I want to take you back to the beginnings of the United States of America. And I think we have to start at the start, which is with Christopher Columbus. So something a lot of people don't know is that Islam hate in the United States, it goes back to Christopher Columbus, even before Christopher Columbus was born. A lot of people always think that Islam hate in the US, it started with 9/11, but that's actually not true at all. And so this isn't just a hunch. The life of Christopher Columbus was branded by victimization by Muslims. And this is something that's been confirmed by Yale professor Alan McKeel. He's written a book about, well, not per se about Christopher Columbus, but Christopher Columbus is mentioned in it. I'm going to show you the book. And basically, Alan McKeel tells us that Christopher Columbus was born right around the time that Muslims, and to be more specific, the Ottoman Empire annihilated the Roman Empire. And it was a big deal for people like Christopher Columbus who, saw the Roman Empire as, the world power at that time, and they got beaten by the Ottoman Empire. Alan McKeel explains that at the time of Christopher Columbus, the Spanish conquistadors were familiar with other Muslim kingdoms as well because Islam ruled south of Spain, Al-Andalus, the Cordoba Emirates, but also North Africa and West Africa and Eastern Europe. And it was known, in this book, but also in lectures by Alan McKeel, he talks about how all these Spanish explorers who would go around to steal things, they were very fearful of Muslims because they knew that Muslims dominated them when it comes to sailing, but also when it comes to military competence. And so they were trying at all times to stay away from wherever Muslims were. So Christopher Columbus, I'm talking about, but also his camaraderies, like for example, Prince Henry, which was the Prince of Portugal. And so like I said, one thing that was huge in the lifetime of Christopher Columbus is that the Roman Empire was defeated right before he was born. Anyways, another thing which I think is really important to know is that according to Alan, in the same decade that Christopher Columbus reached the Americas, he also worked for the Spanish rulers, Isabel and Fernand, and they had declared a war against Islam, a holy war. First of all, they wanted to beat Muslims, but second of all, they also wanted to find lands where Muslims were not. And so you could say that they were waging a global war against Islam because they also wanted to make sure that they would become the biggest and Muslims would slowly be erased from history. And I think that's really interesting because a lot of people say we shouldn't say Islamophobia because people who have a problem with Islam, they don't fear it, but they're hating Islam. But the thing is, in this instance, when we're talking about Christopher Columbus and the Spanish rule and the European Christians, they actually did have a fear of Islam. And so the United States is established on a fear of Islam, but as well as a hate of Islam. And that does bring us to the next point, because what I learned from Alan McKeel is that Christopher Columbus and all these other colonizers, they declared that the indigenous people who they encountered in the Americas, that they were their enemy. I don't know if you remember that, but this is something that you should know, that the colonizers who entered the Americas, they declared the indigenous people to be their enemy. And one of the reasons why I think they would see them as their enemy is because they also labeled them as Muslims. And this is something I learned from Alan McKeel, because in the diary of Christopher Columbus, you can read on the 29th of October that he had seen a mosque. Christopher Columbus had seen a mosque when he reached the Americas. And I verified this further And I read his diary of Christopher Columbus on the website of King's College. And it's true, he did talk about seeing a mosque. And then I also learned from Alan McGill, who is the Yale University professor, that Cortes, another explorer, mentions the same, but that he says that he saw 100 mosques in one city. And so I found a book with the letters that Cortes wrote on archive.org. And by the way, you can find all the books I mentioned on archive.org. I don't know if you know this website, but it's basically a free library, an American free library. So anyways, what I'm trying to say is, not only did the Spanish reach the Americas trying to avoid Muslims, but also because they hated Muslims. And upon arrival in the Americas, they found their enemy, who they referred to as Muslims. You know, they referred to their places as worship as mosque. They referred to their clothing as Moorish clothing, and they called even the people who were leaders like sultans. And so that could have been a reason why the annihilation of indigenous people has been at the scale that it's been, which means that more than 100 million people have been taken out by the colonizers, right? That's the part I want to start off with. All these stories about Christopher Columbus, his life, they go very deep. Obviously, this is something that you could talk about for hours. But what I'm trying to say is that it did not start with 9/11. That's for sure. The fear against Muslims in American society is very deep, and it's also very strong. And I'm going to continue to describe also why it might be that Mamdani, who is a Muslim, openly and proudly, might be put in office on purpose to serve a deeper and darker agenda, which is the glass cliff phenomenon. I just mentioned it a little bit. But before we go there, I just want to go over another response to his win, and this time by Megyn Kelly. She said that the win of Mamdani means New York is going to become a communist Bolshevik town. And when I see people like her speak, I'm like, are books illegal in the US? Like, I don't understand. Like, do you get arrested when you read a book in the United States? Because like there's a lot of intellectual degeneracy there. That's what I saw. And you know, I'm not Christian like Megyn Kelly, but if I was, I wouldn't throw around these words like the Bolsheviks just like that, because the Bolsheviks actually consisted mostly out of Jews. And they murdered mostly Christians and Muslims as well. I think it was 60 million Christians that were killed. And, you know, I think Kelly was just trying to use as many big words as she could, but she definitely wasn't trying to make sense. So if you want to read about this, you should check out this book by Alexander Solzhenitsyn. He wrote about it, and some of the famous podcasters like Candace Owens, I think Tucker Carlson also talked about it. They've talked about how, you know, so many Christians have been killed, 60 million, by Jews, the Bolsheviks. And so this is very well known. Another guy who talked about it was Dan Bilzerian. I think he lost a lot of business because he started pointing this out. Anyways, the thing is, if you weren't so blinded by your Muslim hate, dear Megyn Kelly, you could have actually spoken up for your own religion, the Christians, but you didn't because you don't know your history, first of all, and second of all, your personality is grounded in the fact that you're victimized by Muslims. Okay, but having said that, having talked about another example of an American being victimized by Muslims, I want to explain another thing to you. So I've said it before, the American identity is centered around being victimized by Muslims. It's established, the country is established on victimhood by Muslims, right? And this has been researched. Like, I'm not even making this up. Being a victim of Islam, it dictates the culture of America. And so I'm going to tell you about another historical event where Americans were being victimized by Muslims, which is the core and the center of their identity. And so PEW has done research and to find out which historical event had the highest impact on the lives of Americans. And so the majority of people 76%, they said that 9/11 was the largest historical event they experienced, which changed their life in a significant way that no other event had done. And they're talking about the internet not being as large as 9/11 in terms of impact on their life. Like, can you imagine? Can you imagine that you're part of a country where you feel like, the internet or like AI hasn't done as much for your life and the trajectory of your life in your country as 9/11? I thought that was hilarious. Only 20% of the people view the development of a smartphone, laptops, or, the internet as the largest historical event, which is crazy, or AI. Okay, the thing is, I don't believe Americans are so weak and so like such victims by default. I think the media has brainwashed them into believing that they're just perpetual victims of Muslims. So my question was going to be, did New York City recover from 9/11 to, be able to choose a Muslim mayor? But when I read these numbers, I was like, never, that's never gonna happen. Even though I love Mamdani, I think he's an amazing person. I think he's a great politician, very eloquent. He seems like a people's person. He seems very refined. I'm not sure if NYC or the Americas are ready for this. I wanted to find out to what extent Americans believe this story of 9/11, because I felt like maybe this is clear to everyone at this point, that this wasn't something Muslims had done to them, but maybe they believe, maybe the government lied to them. That's what I thought. And so I couldn't find any recent numbers on it. And I do think it's important to find recent numbers on how people feel about 9/11, because I think this might have changed in the past 21 months when this conflict within Palestine has happened and a lot of untruths have been uncovered. However, this research was not available. Another thing I could find, however, was the trust in the government. How much do people believe the American government is trustworthy? I mean, that could also indicate whether they think, they're being wronged by Muslims or whether the government is lying to them, right? Well, one thing I found is that the Americans don't trust their governments almost at all, okay? A huge chunk of Americans does not trust their government. And okay, just to give you an overview, PEW has written an article on how trust in the US government has been declining from 70% in the late 1950s to a huge low in 2023. It was 16% at the time, guys, 16. And in 2024, it was 22%. But guess what? I'm gonna tell you the funniest thing ever. So trust in the government in America has been declining since the 1950s. Guess which event made people trust their government more? It was 9/11. Literally nothing brings together Americans than being victimized by Muslims. Literally, the country is founded on that idea. Their identity is founded on that idea. All they do, it was the biggest event in their life, the most impactful event in their life, and it made them trust the government more. I thought that was hilarious. I just want to show you very quickly, by the way, the numbers for people who do trust their government, the top 6. And what's really nice to see is that the 4 out of top 6 countries that trust their government, the top 6, 4 of them are Muslim countries. I thought that was amazing. China, number 1, supposedly the enemy of the United States, number 1. And then second one, Indonesia. Then it's India, UAE, Saudi Arabia, and then Malaysia. I thought that was so amazing. Anyways, okay, let's continue and go to another response to Mamdani's win, this time by Nancy May. I didn't know her. I did get this tweet and I thought it was funny. She tweeted, "After 9/11, we said never forget. I think sadly we've forgotten." I'm like, why are you lying, Nancy? You guys didn't forget anything. You're literally still the biggest victims of Muslims. I wish you would forget. Start forgetting already. I think they need to find something more profound to attach their personality to. Is this what Americans are about? Like, they're like so great, living in the greatest country, but you're always crying over what Muslims have done to you. And all of them are so uninformed, like another thing that makes them look so American, these politicians. It's embarrassing. Okay, anyways, we're gonna go to the next point. I believe Mamdani has a great chance of winning the elections if it's just about who he is. Like I already said, I think he's an eloquent person, he's refined, he seems to really care about the people, and I love that, right? But if he would win, I think we need to consider a very dark scenario, and that is the glass cliff phenomenon. So we already know that America is like a perpetual victim of Muslims, right? But at times of crisis, there's nothing that brings together the country than being victimized by Muslims again. And so a reason to let him rise to the top could be because a crisis would take place. And so, okay, let me just go back to the glass cliff. So the glass cliff is a concept commonly used in the corporate world. It's when the board of a company knows the company is about to fall off a cliff into total destruction. And they do not want to be blamed by the shareholders. So what do? They look for a person to hire who people feel inclined to blame when something goes wrong. And so in the corporate world, research shows that it tends to be women. So they put women in a place of leadership when they know there's about to be a collapse of the company. And this is a British university who has researched it, and this has been coined in the early 2000s. And so, but this also happens in the political world. Obviously, I think Kamala Harris is an example of the glass cliff, where they knew the party didn't stand a chance. They put her forward as, running for presidency when they knew she didn't stand a chance, and then people were more inclined to criticize Kamala rather than the years of presidency by Biden or the campaigns that had been run already by Biden or the policy of the party. So anyways, that's an example. But we're going back to Mamdani. So I already told you, JP Morgan has said that the chance of a financial crisis in April were 60%. In May, it was 40%. And so this already shows that it's highly volatile. But we also have to take into account that if a crisis were to take place, it will be all eyes on New York City. That's something you really need to take into account. And I'm going to explain to you why. I want to illustrate to you the significance of New York City as a financial location. And I'm going to use some information by Investopedia. So in 2022, the American financial sector comprised 29.2% of the state's total output. So the financial sector is generally a big chunk of the United States' output. And so New York City is the financial city of the United States. Financial services of the United States are highly concentrated in New York City. So that's a big thing to consider. A financial crisis is looming. And if it would be the case that a financial crisis would take place, unemployment in New York City, homelessness, safety threats, chaos, and crime would become a reality. And who would be better to blame than Sohran Mamdani in that situation? And so that is something that I think is really important for all of us to consider, that if he does become mayor of New York City, that he has a lot coming for him in this financial climate. So do I think that New York City is ready for Mamdani? If it's just about him as a person, absolutely. I think he's probably one of the most likable Muslim politicians I've ever seen, maybe even politicians in general. And I think he comes across as a refined person, a person of the people. He knows how to read the room. I think I've seen him in situations where he's talking to politicians, common people, famous people. And at all times, he's just a very likable person. And so I also think he's very humble, by the way. I think that makes him a great candidate to be mayor for any city, to be frank. But knowing anything about American history, I think it's safe to say that they play very dirty and they have a deep-rooted fear of Muslims, but their identity is also grounded in being victimized by Muslims. And so that's the end of today. I wanted to answer the question, is New York City ready for a mayor like Mamdani? I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure to subscribe to my channel, and I look forward to seeing you again in my next video.